So I just called you Sarita, but we have a new name for you, Sarah. I have all sorts of names for you. That's from somebody
Wait,
else. Now we have another one from a
who?
guest yesterday, from
Oh,
Ryan.
no, Sarah.
Sarah.
Sarah. Sarah. You all will hear in
Yes.
another episode soon.
Yep.
A Scottish lad called me Sarah.
I
So
loved it.
so cute.
So here we are. We're back reading, as we discussed, I Would Meet You Anywhere by Susan Kiyoito. We have three chapters ahead today, A Small Hole.
And by
And
the way, we have one more
I know
episode of
of
this
this
book.
till our
We're gonna
finale.
cram those last chapters next episode.
Yeah. And then we have Susan on herself. So today
Mhm.
is A Small Hole, Spit, and I Would Meet You at the Ferry Building. And that's for anybody following along. And those are the three we're tackling in part three, isn't it? I think it's in part three today. Yeah.
It is part three. And the small
So,
hole was really sad. It
mm,
was a surgery for Susan's father, and it they thought it was pretty routine.
yeah,
And they, she was describing like watching another family in the waiting room and how they came out and said, your loved one is doing
yeah.
okay. You'll be able to see them soon. And then the doctor came to them
10 hours
looking
later.
10 hours later, looking devastated, and her father didn't make it. And it turned out they
Yeah.
found like a small hole that they weren't expecting
Yeah.
in
It
his
was
heart.
hard.
And yeah.
I had a really, I wanted to skip this part because I lost my mom in a surgery, my adopted mom in a surgery the same way, where we went in and we thought it was routine and it was going to handle a lot. And I remember them walking. When I was reading it, I had a hard time because I remember them walking towards my brother and I and her face, the doctor's face,
Mm.
that was coming out, the second in charge doctor, to tell us that she was still under having things done, but they were coming and just my brother was eating a snack, like not looking at her, like chatting. And I just knew. And it was like that kind of, I remember letting out like a guttural scream. And I had been sort of the strong person and my brother like having to make these decisions. And we were all of a sudden in the operating room watching things, but it's really, it messes with you, right? So her mom was so devastated. When she was screaming, like, what am I
Yeah,
gonna
like
do?
what am I gonna do? What am I gonna do?
And she had been this amazing, strong person handling all the appointments, all these things, and she just did not keep it together. And Susan really stepped in and was always closer to her dad, but became closer a little bit here to her mom because
Well, her mom moved in for
hmm
17 years, and she
yeah,
actually said like she'd lived with her parents for 17 years, and now her mom lived with her for 17 years, and she
it's
ended up getting
interesting.
dementia.
Yeah.
Um,
And
and
Susan was in the sandwich thing where you're taking care of
right.
everybody.
Yeah.
It was a
So,
lot. This is sad. I mean, it's getting sad just because we're winding down. Number one, I'm going to miss the book. Number two, it's the reality of aging parents and then all the feelings that come up where she kind of had to squash other feelings and deal with just what's in front of her every day.
mhm.
One thing that was neat is her joining this group at the camp, right? Do you remember which part was
I
that? Was in
do, but that was
Spit.
in the next, yeah, like the next, the
Yeah,
next
in Spit.
chapter was when she joins the group, and they're like, and she got the job of they wanted to
Hmm.
need a packed camp director, right?
Hmm.
Which was an adoption alliance. So she took that on and then met a lot of transracial adoptees
Yeah.
um, and listened to. That's when she found out about ambiguous loss
Yes.
um, of and that's where she talked about getting the DNA.
Hmm.
Um, and learning about the new it was the newness of the genetic sites
Yeah. And
and
one thing that was interesting that she did is she said that she joined this from an adopted parent who was very open and trying.
mhm.
This person who put this camp together for the alliance was an adopted parent and named Beth. And I just think it was interesting because that's what we always talk about. That she said if people could be more open and like this whole thing of not, she was really surprised by that, especially back then with an adopted parent And I do think that's sort of a message of this book too, is kind of if everyone would be open and talk to their adoptee and everybody gets she even said people at that camp would go with their adopted children and learn, oh, I need to move into a different neighborhood with my child or be part of this community more, which, you know, that would be the neatest thing for
When you're talking about
people.
transracial
Right,
adoptees,
right.
yes, because a
Transracial.
lot of these adoptive parents were white
Mm-hmm.
parents who adopted uh,
Kids from other
different
places.
race
Yeah.
children and all that. And so it was like frank, open conversations about that. Um, and then for the first time, she met all different, all different types of views of
Yeah.
adoption, right? Serious abolitionists and people who are all for adoption. She met the whole gamut of
Yeah.
people. And um, so yeah, it was an interesting. And then one of them, when she decided to do the DNA, she went over to one of the
Yeah. Rouse.
fellow pack people's homes and spit into the tube. And then of course did not, but she found out
Yeah.
that even though she always knew that she was half Japanese, she found out, she was 47% half Japanese.
Yeah.
And then I think, what did she say? English, Welsh,
Welsh.
Scottish, like similar to me.
Yeah. Oh, and a little bit Korean.
And a little bit Korean, in which kind of
Mm-hmm.
she felt like, oh, I'm simpatico with my Korean
Yeah.
adoptees.
Yeah.
And
And
then
also,
nothing
yeah.
really came. She didn't,
No,
she, there wasn't really
nobody on
any,
there.
yeah.
Like way down there, like
There's
six.
still no answer. And then she found a search angel that was
Mm-hmm.
near where she was, near the Midwest where
Mm-hmm.
Yumi had been. And he called Yumi, and Yumi was like, "Nope." So he's like, "Sorry, can't help you." She's like, "Wait a minute, I
It
thought
was like
this
a
was
private
what you
detective. I think she
did."
had to
Yeah,
pay him.
she paid him. He's like, "Sorry, I've done what I can do." Like,
Talk,
thanks.
talk to her. Yeah, I know how that's gonna go. And I
Yeah,
think something to highlight too, if you're listening to the podcast and you are not an adoptee, I think it's we know, so we've read this whole book where we know she's half Japanese, obviously. Okay. We
yeah,
know who her mother is. But just her seeing it on paper is so validating. And I think that's something that you and I discuss and other adoptees discuss is when people say, well, what's the big deal? I mean, you have this great life. Well, it is a big deal.
yeah.
Even Susan, who knew who she was, when you see the validation of who you are, there's something very grounding about knowing who you are. Okay. And
And and
that's a right of all people.
exactly. And might I remind, as I often do, that the two biggest pastimes in this country are gardening and ancestry. Why is there such a disconnect with adoptees? I mean, there is a widespread disconnect
Yeah.
for
Everybody
how
gets to
we,
know, and except
but
you.
just not you, because you're a lucky,
But let me
person to
tell
have
you about
escaped
my
such
aunt
terrible,
from,
yeah.
yeah, but let me tell you about my genetics
Who I
from
look just
this
like, Yeah.
and why I do this. And, yeah, exactly. I just think these little moments are times to highlight it because she does it subtly, but it's true.
Yeah.
And then the last part, I would meet you at the ferry building.
Is that
Someone,
she hears from Yumi,
yeah,
who she
again,
thought she would never hear from again. And Yumi's like, I'm going to be in California. I want to get together. And it was Thanksgiving. And
yeah.
Susan, every instinct in her was to say, yes, I'll come right away. But somehow she had 17 people come,
I
17
mean,
keeps coming up. It's so interesting.
yeah.
17 people coming over. Finally was like, I'll see you after,
And even then, her
day
family's
after.
like, you're going to go and to San
Like,
Francisco and
yeah,
see
her
her.
husband was like, what? And
And
yeah,
also, he was protective of her. Like,
right.
because, it is, she even said the way she called her, she hadn't heard from her all those years. Hi, Susan, it's Yumi. Like, so,
Susan! Susan! It's
yeah,
Yumi.
I'd be a sucker myself. I
I was
mean,
saying, well, who wouldn't be?
no, who wouldn't be?
Um, and then so the daughters give her pictures
Hmm.
to give to Yumi and sign the back, and they meet for lunch, and Yumi looked at the pictures and tried to give them back, and Susan was like, no,
They're for
they wanted
you.
you to have them. And yeah, and it was just they kind of caught up, and
That was kind of is.
nothing, yeah,
Yeah.
that was kind of it. They had a, head touch and got a picture taken together, and then off she went,
Yeah.
just kind of in and out of her life.
She's like a visitor in her life, like
Mm-hmm.
that's
With
not the word I'm
a,
looking for, but
and always on her terms, right? Like,
always on her terms.
yeah.
Like this apparition who comes in and then it messes with Susan's head a little and she seems
Mm-hmm.
stronger, but we haven't gotten to the next chapter. But it's a lot when someone you ghosts you literally and comes
Yeah.
back around. I mean,
Like nothing had happened.
nothing. And
No
no discussion.
acknowledgement. No, like, hey, I'm sorry. And also she was staying with
Oh,
Mika,
right.
who Mika also has cut
So
Susan out of her
yeah.
life. So, just like salt on the wound. But just
Mm-hmm.
also how odd to not even address, like, hey, I know you haven't heard from me, but blah, blah, blah.
Something.
Like nothing, nothing. The elephant in the room is never addressed.
No.
And then the bigger elephant of the
I've been in
father,
some
like
relationships like that.
me too. I know that's what I was thinking. Like this
Yeah.
is like a dysfunctional relationship.
Yeah, it is.
So,
Well,
okay, well, next
one
week
more.
we finish the book. We have a few chapters, more than usual, but
Hmm.
we are finishing the book.
I
So
think
there you go.
it's
We have
three
about
chapters and an epilogue.
right. Or is it
So
4 chapters?
is it 4 chapters?
I think it's four
Well,
chapters and an
it's a little
epilogue.
longer, but we're going to finish it and
Mm-hmm.
you're going to hear from Susan and it's exciting. We have a lot going
Yeah.
on, Sarah. It's cool.
Yes, we do.
So stay tuned for Stacie.
Yep. See you in a minute.
See you in a minute.